And we are live. Welcome to Design Streaming Sessions. I'm your host, as usual, Ferma Henry. And I was. What a week. What a week, hey, what a week. It has been one crazy of a week, actually a couple of weeks for me. There's just been so much happening in my world. I don't know how much of it I can actually talk about on the stream. But yeah, there is a concept of doing a lot of complex client work. And a lot of retrospection on kind of like the type of work that I'm doing, the clients that I'm working with, and really shuffling things around in my priorities over the next couple of months or weeks, right? So here we go. Today's session, let me control the music a little bit. I think it's a little bit too hot in my head as well. Let me bump up the microphone just a tad, little bit more, so that you have most of that smooth audio, and you don't miss a word that I'm saying. So, yeah. Happy, what is it, Thursday, maybe Friday in some places, looking forward to just cruising through this chat, talking through a couple of things. Maybe let me record it and actually use this for this week's live stream, because I haven't had a chance to do that. I did have a chance to put up a latest a blog post on dobetterux.com talking about kind of like the future of work, kind of the topics that I've been talking about over the past couple of weeks here on the live stream. So the future of work, AI, VR, etc. I'm super excited to talk about some of those topics on the live stream today. So yeah, let's get going. Maybe before I jump right into it, I would just like to introduce you, if you have not joined the community yet. We do have a community page over on LinkedIn called Do Better UX Community. Look it up, check it out, join the community. Let's have honest, open conversations around UX design careers, and just learn from each other, really. I'm trying to make this an open, honest communication channel that junior UX designers can learn from seasoned UX designers, and vice versa, because I don't think that we are ever sharp enough or well trained enough to not learn from people who are junior than us. Cool. So let me get into it. Today I want to talk about a couple of topics, but well, not a couple of topics. I want to talk about one main topic, which is UX design career roles, right? Or roles within the UX career space. And I'm going to be a little bit tricky about it at some point, but at the same time, I am going to be optimistic about, kind of what we're seeing in this space. So I want to talk about an old story that you probably have seen a lot of people go through whenever they get into their UX design career, starting out, whether as a graphic designer or a web designer, whatever it is, that they call themselves at that point, before we had the privilege and the glory of calling ourselves UX designers, right? Before the terminology actually came through. I used to do a lot of UX design work before the terminology actually made it onto the mainstream market, right? And how do users research? It was called user-centric design. There was a lot of names that come through this space, and let me know what your role is called. Is it a very specific niche one, like UX engineer, unicorn, or something like that, right? Super interested to know. But anyway, let me get back to the story. So we've seen this story over and over, right? Like, there has been so many roles that people kind of like have self-proclaimed and kind of created within this UX designer space. And I think that has come from the history of UX design and the informalness of how, we kind of came up with the terminology, the training around it, etc., etc. So UX design, at least in my case, does not have quite a traditional background of education, such as other fields, right? Like engineering and software engineering, things like being a coder or a developer, right? It doesn't have such strong elements in the training part of it. So for the past 10-15 years, most of us have been doing UX design, not necessarily understanding that it is called UX design. Like I said, it was design-led thinking, it was user-centric design, etc., right? We had all these cool terminologies around the process and what we did as designers, but not necessarily called ourselves UX designers at that point, right? And most of us were either specializing in specific niches like graphic design, web design, maybe even some UI design as well, right? I remember back in my days kind of like designing websites in Photoshop, actually. I can't believe I'm saying that, designing websites in Photoshop. But yeah, I used to design websites in Photoshop. That's how long I've been doing this design thing. But going back to the topic is it's super interesting to see how these roles have evolved, right? And not only in expertise and niche things that we can do, but also in the roles themselves, right? I think in the UX design world is one of the spaces where we have probably one of the biggest spectrum of roles, right? You could put anything in front of designer, and you can possibly get away with it, right? So we've seen the term UX designer come to life, and yes, there is reasoning and some weight to that. We've seen product designer, product manager, product developer. We've seen UX engineer, UX researchers. I could keep on going, right? But all these are kind of like niche spaces within the UX space, and I'm not saying that these titles are wrong or necessarily don't describe what the person does, and I understand where they come from, because as more and more UX designers or people who call themselves UX designers actually started coming onto the market, this over flooded the market with a lot of people that probably were coming from the graphic design background or had some knowledge of design in one way or the other, and realized that the UX design title or the UX design field is kind of like catching on. There was a lot of money to be made, especially within startups, before big corporates kind of like started catching on onto the design thinking trend, right? So we've seen that role evolve, basically mainly from that, right? This overpopulated, overcrowded market of people who call themselves UX designers, and we've seen people who do very specific niche things within the UX design space moving away from the main UX design role, probably getting into the product designer space. and specializing in more things like no, I actually do research, right, which is most of what traditional UX designers would do, the desktop research, user research, etc., etc., doing interviews with people in that type of skill set, right? So that's how initially I think we started seeing these roles explode, right? Purely from people trying to differentiate themselves from people who were biting on the low-hanging fruit of what a UX designer is. And at some point I really felt the impact of this, because I think it kind of diluted what UX design meant, and people at that early stage really went into a stage of confusion, especially the market, right? They didn't understand, what do UX designers do, what is the value, and for somebody who was mainly doing freelance consulting work, it was really difficult for me to bring that value or articulate the value that the processes and the work that I do bring, versus what every high school college graduate kid was calling themselves a UX designer, and probably just charging a third of the price of what I would be charging, and kind of like doing very high level work and not really getting into the details, right? And usually people in the early days will be looking for like really good designers who've got some idea of understanding what customers need, not necessarily that those people would do complex research and things like that and actually talk to the customer. They will probably like look at trends and things like that, and if the client is kind of like happy with what has been proposed, that's how it kind of goes, right? It's like, okay, cool, I kind of like this thing, and they would execute that. It's only when big companies, big startups, or startups that kind of like made it, right, started really using design thinking and UX design effectively, that we started seeing people taking it seriously, and new different roles and values started coming from that from the UX design space. So there's so many roles. I'm just touching on the few here, and I think that's the history around it. And where are we going? We're kind of like seeing a space that keeps on evolving, right? We keep on getting all these crazy new titles that people within this space come up with, and it's really based on what they are doing in UX, right? So UX researcher, UX developer, UX whatever it is, right? But I think basically what they're trying to say is that I'm a designer who is capable of doing research or coding or whatever it is, right? And I still feel that the substance of the UX within that context gets lost in what are you actually calling yourself a UX person for, right? So what is a UX designer? I would like to know your definition in the comments below or wherever you're watching this. What is a UX designer? What do you think? What is your definition? And what is your current title? Does it have UX in it? Does it start with UX and then if it's followed by something else? How did you get to that title? Yeah, super interested to know what you call yourself. Myself, I'm personally just a digital consultant. I think I do a lot of UX work. I do some UI work, and that's how I've kind of defined myself over time. But I do come from the world of traditional UX design, graphic design, and other things of that sort. Cool. So interested to know what your role is and what your definition of a UX designer is. Right now, we are seeing more and more of these roles coming to life with AI. Now there's like UX prompt writer, etc., right? It's going to explode. It's going to go crazy. But one of the field that I'm really interested in, and I think that can benefit from genuine UX roles within that space, is the space of mixed reality, that is AR, VR, especially now that it's the most anticipated thing that is probably going to come out of Apple's WWDC 2023. That is, a few weeks away from the time of recording of this live stream right here, and or podcast, depending on when you listen, where you're listening to it, or kind of watching it. Cool. So what I'm excited about, and the roles that I'm really excited about to see come to life, are around the mixed reality space. And the reason why I'm excited about that is that I think the popularity of this space is about to really come to life, right? Let me just get a gulp of water quickly. I think the mixed reality space is really about to come to life now. And the reason why I say that is that we've had a lot of good products in the VR space, AR space, mixed reality space, right? But they're not really Apple based, right? They're not Apple products. And why that is important is that I think Apple is one of the companies that has got the ability to make things popular, really bring the hype and the vibe to a specific market. Now, given the use cases for mixed reality is still very minimal, I'm super interested to know how is Apple going to implement this. What are the tools that they're going to give to designers and developers to develop around this most anticipated headset that they are potentially coming up with. I think like the iPhone came after some really good phones. I used to have a really good HTC phone before the iPhone came out, but Apple's products have got the ability to really make a whole product category or industry popular and familiar. And that's the reason why I think that most of new roles are really going to start coming out of this space. Actually, I'm interested to know if Apple is hiring mixed reality designers. I'm just having a look at their roles and their what you call it, careers at Apple website, just to see what roles they have there, and if they already started creating some specific titles within the UX space, AR, VR space, right? So yeah, it's super interesting to see Apple finally getting into this space. Again, a lot of this is speculation and anticipation of what is going to come out of WWDC 2023, but it is really exciting news. So some of the titles or titles that I see coming onto the UX space mainly, right? It will be things like mixed reality experience designer or things like that, right? And I've been talking about this type of roles and this type of technologies for probably a good 3 years since I've been doing the podcast, Not a UX Designer, and doing this live streams on the Do Better UX channel here on YouTube. I've been talking about AR, VR, and voice as, you know, really good upcoming places for you to position yourself in if you are an expert in design, or somebody who's starting out in design and looking for a niche that you can really establish yourself in. It's still new, it's still there. You can really start coming up with methodologies, processes, and ways of doing things uniquely in these spaces, because as much as some traditional, you know, design thinking practices may still apply, you know, such as, you know, doing interviews and, you know, doing product research with users, I think that there's a huge opportunity for new techniques and processes to be created, right? And if you are interested enough and you play around with these things enough, you kind of like, you know, start building the trends, right? Like if we look at designing for the Apple Watch, for example, or, you know, watch experiences, I'm gonna say Apple Watch because, you know, kind of really started seeing people designing for watches when the Apple Watch came out, right? We didn't see this with Pebble or, you know, the other Garmin watches that were there before, right? So we started seeing, you know, more roles coming out of that space, and, you know, people really specializing and niching down into specific things. Even the things with voice, I think that there's still a lot of potential within the voice space for a lot of people to get into it and make a really big impact on what comes out of there, right? So there's all these cool things that we can definitely focus on, but most importantly, I'm interested in seeing what are the roles that are going to come out of this mixed reality space once Apple has entered this new product category and started creating these new roles. Again, what roles do you think are going to come out of you know, this cool experience? What current roles do you know, you know, UX roles that are found within the mixed reality space, right? I think I'm just gonna go in the comments at some point and just, you know, kind of like put in all the different roles that I find online after this show, and yeah, I'm gonna probably write, you know, a long blog post with just the titles and names of UX designers and the roles that they kind of take, right? But yeah, I think there is some method to the madness. I think there is some sense in the madness of all these new design roles being created, right? And I think it's trying to be a balance of not really, you know, having a specific definition of UX design and trying to be specific on what exactly that you do within this UX design space, which is much easier for people to know what it is that you do, right? So if you say you're a UX researcher, it's you know, much easier than, you know, just saying you're a UX designer who does UX research, UI work, etc., etc. Then you have to explain after that. So there is some utility in the titles, right? But where does it stop, right? Does it stop at unicorn, UX design unicorn, right? Where does it stop? I think it stops when it stops being descriptive of actually what it is that you're doing, right, within that UX space. And I think that's where it stops really, because then we kind of like start creating our own words and vocabulary, which is not a bad thing. I think the dictionary is actually to be contested, and we should come up with more words. I just think that the language has not evolved so much over the past 100 years or so, right? I mean, we've added words like Google, etc., but not so much, right? So yeah, I encourage you to totally come up with your own words, right? But within the UX design space, what roles actually make sense, what are the ones that are basically BS, right? That are leaning more over into the realm of nonsensical roles, right? Cool. So yeah, that's my conversation today. I really wanted to talk about UX designer roles, how they've evolved, my thoughts on why I think there's so many, which comes from a flux of people coming within this space and creating a demand, for people to be able to, for people to start preferencing the value that they actually bring within the UX design space, right? Because there were so many people that came in this UX design space that are not actually UX designers, or people that kind of like just call themselves UX designers, right? And yeah, it's interesting to see where this industry has gotten to and evolved over the past 10-15 years. We kind of now have a little bit more streamlined education around this. People are creating credited versions of education around UX design, and there are some roles that are kind of like copy and pasted from the books now, right? It's established, it's there, right? But still, I'd like to know, what is your definition of a UX designer, and what is your current UX design role at the moment? That is the conversation for today. Now, I hope to see you a little bit more frequently on the podcast and the live stream. And check out the website dobetterux.com. That's one word, dobetterux.com. If you want to listen to, just have a one place to see our previous podcasts, to see some of the content that we put out there. We will be adding on more blog posts on a weekly basis now. I think with the blog posts we'll actually be able to do more than one, and hope to catch you on the live stream and on the podcast with a little bit more frequency. It has been one crazy week for me, and it is going to be a crazy month or two to come, while I kind of work with intense client work and just recalibrating the work that I'm doing, and putting a little bit more work into growing this community and inviting more people to the conversation. So yeah, that is something that you can look forward to, is to start having guests on the podcast or the live stream, depending on if the guests are live ready, right? If they're not live ready, we'll have them on the podcast. If you haven't listened to the podcast and you're watching this live on YouTube, the podcast is called Not a UX Designer. Links in the description below. Final word will be an invite to our community. Now, I've grown this community to just over 100 before I killed the initial group. And the idea there was a little bit wild, because I was really not getting the engagement, and I felt that there were not the right people within this group. So I killed the group. I started it over again. We are growing slowly, week to week, but feel free to join us in the Do Better UX community. The idea around the community is to really help each other navigate our design careers, whether you're a junior, senior person, mid-level, whatever it is. Please share what your issues are, some of your successes, and help other people as they ask questions within the community. I'll be hosting community events once we start getting traction, where we can actually just all jump on a call and have one big conversation where we can, share ideas, thoughts, throw out questions, and just geek out around UX design, product delivery. That's the different topics that we talk about here on the stream. So until the next one, peace.